Have Carnegie come and meet me. Tell him the answer is yes.
I believe that that is the earliest in the day that I've ever drunk champagne.
Congratulations, Carnegie. You're now the richest man in the world.
Would you have said yes, Morgan, if I had asked for 100 million more?
Goodbye, Carnegie.
For 30 years, Andrew Carnegie has battled John D. Rockefeller for the title of America's richest man. And now, he's finally surpassed him. The deal gives Carnegie a personal net worth of over $310 billion in today's money, the largest private fortune the modern world has ever seen.
Initially, there is this enormous letdown. He can't quite believe now that he has no connection with Pittsburgh or his mills, that there is no Carnegie Steel anymore. And I think it's hard for him to get used to that.
If somebody accepts the ask too quickly, then you think there was more room there. But I never like to look back. I'm a very forward-thinking person and a very positive-thinking person. And the transactions that I did or did not do, I very rarely have any remorse over a situation. I like to move on.
J.P. Morgan calls his new company U.S. Steel. It's instantly the biggest corporation in the world. The first company in history to be worth more than $1 billion. And it will dominate the steel business for almost 100 years, virtually unchallenged. But the creation of U.S. Steel is only possible in this new era of unchecked monopolies. An era Morgan helped create when he and his rivals put their president in the White House.
Chúng tôi không ngừng nâng cao chất lượng sản phẩm và dịch vụ để mang đến những trải nghiệm giải trí đỉnh cao, ra mắt khách.
They may have helped buy the president, but they can't avoid politics forever. Their power over the nation's biggest industries soon catches the attention of an emerging politician, Theodore Roosevelt.
Roosevelt was the kind of figure that had to dominate, had to, in a sense, own the room.
Roosevelt is from a wealthy New York family and could have become a businessman like Carnegie or Rockefeller, but he took a different path, foregoing a career in business for one in politics. But the young Roosevelt had an image problem. His fancy clothes and upper-class demeanor left him open to ridicule. He took great pains to remake his image, posing in a New York City photography studio dressed as a Badlands hunter, with a $500 engraved silver hunting knife from Tiffany's. The images help Roosevelt transform himself from a wealthy New York aristocrat into a man of the people. And as Roosevelt enlists in the army, the image he manufactured becomes real.
Theodore Roosevelt became a hero during the Spanish-American War. And the Republican boss of New York State said to Theodore Roosevelt, "You're my boy." Got him the Republican nomination, and by virtue of his heroism, became New York governor. Roosevelt quickly demonstrated an independent streak. Roosevelt could not be manipulated at all.
As governor of New York, Roosevelt passes laws clamping down on big business. His biggest targets are the nation's most powerful monopolies and the men behind them. But Rockefeller and Morgan know they can't buy Roosevelt. So they set out to make him as weak as possible.
One way to figure out how to keep Roosevelt from becoming a major figure at the national level is to make him vice president, because the vice president doesn't really have much to do.
Heading into a new election year, it's a rematch of 1896, McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan. Through a series of backroom deals, some of the nation's richest and most powerful men convince McKinley to put Roosevelt on the ticket.
The vice presidency in those days was a place where people went to disappear. They became vice president, were never heard from again. It's almost like a modern witness protection program.
McKinley is re-elected by a comfortable margin, and Roosevelt is sworn in as vice president. With their man still in the White House and their nemesis in a powerless position, Rockefeller and Morgan think they have protected their empires. But their clever ploy may backfire. President William McKinley is re-elected to a second term, and aspiring trustbuster Theodore Roosevelt is installed as vice president, a clever play to silence his influence. With McKinley in office for another 4 years, John Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan have the freedom to expand their empires to unprecedented heights. In September of 1901, President McKinley travels to Buffalo to give a speech heralding America's prosperity. But that prosperity hasn't reached everyone. Many are still struggling to survive. And they're fed up with McKinley's close relationship with big business. Leon Czałgosz is a former factory worker who recently lost his job at a company J.P. Morgan took over during the creation of U.S. Steel. As Czałgosz struggled, he took refuge in the growing anarchist movement. He becomes convinced that the government is helping the rich exploit the poor, and he's determined to put an end to it. Days after the shooting, William McKinley succumbs to his injuries, becoming the third American president to be killed in office. For America's most powerful men, it's the worst-case scenario. An assassin's bullet has robbed them of their president, a man they spent millions to get elected. And with his death, their worst enemy comes to power. Teddy Roosevelt is about to become the leader of the free world.
Mr. Roosevelt, very good to meet you, sir.
The plan of having Roosevelt buried, in effect, in the vice presidency completely backfired, because who could have predicted what would happen, and what would happen so quickly after the election of 1900?
Theodore Roosevelt, raise your right hand. Do you, Theodore Roosevelt, solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of your ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States?
And thus I swear. Now, let's get started.
Roosevelt insisted that the big capitalists recognized that they were mere capitalists, and that the elected officials of the country were the ones that the people had chosen. Nobody elected J.P. Morgan to anything. Nobody elected John D. Rockefeller to anything. But the people had, well, indirectly elected Theodore Roosevelt president. He was going to make the most of it.
Roosevelt quickly launches a campaign against the nation's largest trusts. And his first target is a railroad conglomerate owned by J.P. Morgan.
Morgan demanded to see the president, so he stormed down from New York to Washington, went into the White House, and he said, I don't understand. He said, if we've got a problem, send your man to my man and they'll fix it up. And Roosevelt said, this is exactly the problem with Morgan. He acts as though I'm just a rival boss or something. And Morgan, who thought that he could manipulate Roosevelt, discovered that Roosevelt could not be manipulated at all.
Roosevelt refuses to back down from Morgan. He sues his company in federal court, the first government antitrust case filed against a major corporation. Roosevelt goes on to win, and Morgan's railroad monopoly is broken up. It's a stunning setback for J.P. Morgan, one he'll agonize over for years. And it's a sign of things to come for his fellow Titans. Roosevelt is elected to a second term, and over the course of his administration, he files suit against dozens of trusts. It's a time of great change for the nation. J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, and Andrew Carnegie suddenly find themselves as members of an old guard, aging titans forced to defend their fading empires. But as other monopolies fall, one target refuses to go down. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil has managed to hold off a breakup over multiple administrations. But Rockefeller won't be able to hide forever.
Standard Oil got the reputation as the most hated company in America. It became literally the symbol for big business evils. It was an example of big businesses getting way too much power and nothing or no one available to restrain them.
The government files suit against Standard Oil in what promises to be the biggest antitrust case of all time. And the government is hoping their lead witness will be John D. Rockefeller himself. The feds issue a subpoena, and Rockefeller goes on the run. From California to Maine to Key West, the most powerful man in America has become a fugitive from justice.
He went all over the country to escape being served subpoenas. You know, he was constantly running from the law.
Rockefeller avoids the subpoenas for months, but life intervenes. His son, John Jr., and his wife welcomed the first Rockefeller grandson into the world. Still on the run from the subpoena, Rockefeller is unable to travel to see his grandchild, and the absence is unbearable.
I'm only here for one day.